Another type of sentence error is a run-on. Run-ons occur when writers join independent clauses together when they should not be. Run-ons can be very confusing to readers because it's difficult for the reader then to tell where one sentence stops and another begins. One of the keys to ridding your paragraphs of run-ons is to try reading your paragraphs backwards, sentence by sentence, to check for run-ons. I know that this may sound odd, but what happens when you read your paragraphs backwards is you're not automatically connecting those sentences because you don't know necessarily what's going to come next when you read the paragraph backwards. So you may be more likely to catch any run-on sentences you might have made. Now, if you find a run-on, you can correct it by using one of the following methods. The first method is the most common. All you do is separate the independent clauses with a period and then capitalize the word following the period. I think it helps to draw an arrow, or a line rather, between the independent clauses so you can see where they come together, and then check to be sure you have an independent clause on either side. If you do, one of the methods is to simply put a period between them. So in this sentence, the quarterback threw the ball gracefully down the field. The receiver scored a touchdown. The run-on is occurring here. And you could correct that by putting a period and a capital letter. That, by the way, is the symbol for a capital letter. The quarterback threw the ball gracefully down the field. The receiver scored a touchdown. Another example, Sue hoped for an A on the exam. She made a B. Sometimes it's very hard to catch run-ons when the independent clauses are short. But clearly we have two ideas. They're of equal importance. Her hope for the A and the fact that she made a B. To put these together, you can use a period. Sue hoped for an A on the exam, period. She made a B. The second type of method of correcting a run-on error is to practice what you learned in Module 2 and connect the independent clauses with a comma followed by a coordinating conjunction or compound sentence. Independent clause, comma for, comma and, comma nor, comma but. Of course, there are three more of those, but for some reason they were located later on the screen, so let me go down and pick those up. Comma or, comma yet, comma so. And using these coordinating conjunctions to connect independent clauses. Let's break down the word coordinating. Co means equal, as in a co-worker. So you have the coordinating conjunctions. Conjunct means to join. Con means together. So what we're doing is we're joining together equal ideas using a comma and a coordinating conjunction. The comma alone won't correct the run-on. You're creating another type of sentence error which we're going to study later in this module, the comma splice. The comma must be followed by the coordinating conjunction. The quarterback threw the ball gracefully down the field, comma, and the receiver scored a touchdown. Sue hoped for an A on the exam, comma, but she made a B. Now, and or but can be used for many reasons, but when you see the comma before it, it means that you are connecting independent clause. An educated reader will know what you're doing. You're creating two independent clauses and joining them together to show a relationship between those clauses to the reader. That relationship is one of equality. Another way you can connect those sentences together is to connect the independent clause with the semicolon. And actually here you're not forming a complex sentence, but you're forming a compound sentence. You learned in Module 2, this is a compound sentence. Two independent clauses connected by a semicolon. You also learned that the semicolon has the power of the period. So you cannot use a semicolon unless you can also use a period in the same place. The quarterback gracefully threw, we've got two gracefullys here. The quarterback threw the ball gracefully down the field. The receiver scored a touchdown. Sue hoped for an A on the exam. She made a B. Here's the key. Use a semicolon when the two clauses are closely related in meaning. And many readers prefer that those two clauses be short. Method 4, connect the independent clauses with a semicolon followed by a conjunctive adverb, forming a compound sentence. Common conjunctive adverbs are however, nevertheless, consequently, therefore, thus, otherwise, instead, then, meanwhile, moreover, furthermore, also, in addition. Many students confuse conjunctive adverbs with fanboys. Here's an easy way to remember the difference. No fanboys is composed of a word of more than 3 letters. All conjunctive adverbs have more than 3 letters. What you're going to do is use the comma following a conjunctive adverb of more than 4 letters. So you have I see, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma, independent clause. The quarterback gracefully threw the ball down the field. Then the receiver scored a touchdown. Sue hoped for an A on the exam, semicolon, however, comma, she made a B. Method 5, change one independent clause to a dependent clause by using a subordinating conjunction. The dependent clause can come first or second. Changing one of those clauses to a dependent clause will create a complex sentence. You learned about complex sentences again in Module 2. The subordinating conjunction comes first, followed by creating the dependent clause, followed by a comma, followed by the independent clause. The comma is almost like a caution sign for the reader. You're not stopping the sentence. You're not bringing the sentence to a full stop, but you're pausing and slowing down to let the reader catch a breath before moving on to the remainder of the sentence. After the quarterback gracefully threw the ball down the field, the receiver scored a touchdown. Even though Sue hoped for an A on the exam, she made a B. When the dependent clause comes first, you must insert a comma between the two clauses. So that pattern is dependent clause, comma, independent clause. That is different from when the independent clause comes first, followed by the subordinating conjunction in the dependent clause. There is no comma. Dependent clause first, comma. Independent clause first, no comma. When it's followed by a dependent clause. The receiver scored a touchdown after the quarterback gracefully threw the ball down the field. Sue made a B, even though she had hoped for an A on her exam. When you subordinate, you're placing the idea of lesser importance, sub means under, in a dependent clause, and the idea of greater importance in the independent clause. All right, let's practice. Let's write a RO in the blank if the sentence is a run-on, and let's use a C if the sentence is correct. Then we're going to use any of the methods to correct the run-ons and use each method at least once. Last summer, my friend Maria and I set out on a thrilling whitewater rafting trip on the San Juan River in Colorado. We only have one independent clause, set being the verb, Maria and I being the subject. As you can see, if you remember, all of these are prepositional phrases. If you can mark them out, all you're going to see is last summer my friend Maria and I set out. That sentence is correct. That morning we arrived early. Soon afterward, we met our guide, Rudy. That morning we arrived early. Independent clause. Soon afterward, we met our guide, Rudy. Independent clause. Believe the best way probably to do this is to put a period, capital S, and correct the run-on. Rudy showed us our 8-person raft. Then we met the other rafters. Run-on occurring here. You got the subordinating conjunction. The conjunctive adverb then. You can use Rudy showed us our 8-person raft. semicolon, then comma, we met the other rafters. We couldn't wait to get on the river. We quickly put on our life jackets. Great place right here as these run-ons are occurring. In number 4, it's a great place for a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and the one I'm going to choose is so. We couldn't wait to get on the river, comma, so we quickly put on our life jackets. As Rudy shouted the safety instructions, we listened to the white water roaring in the river beside us. We have a subordinating conjunction as, beginning the dependent clause as Rudy shouted our safety instructions. And then the rest of this is an independent clause. We listen to the white water roaring in the river beside us. You have a dependent clause, comma, independent clause. You have a correct sentence. Maria and I headed to the front of the raft for the best view. That's clearly correct. Only one idea expressed there. Soon we were surrounded by the whitewater rapids of the beautiful San Juan. Again, only one idea expressed. It is a correct sentence. If you get confused on numbers 6 and 7, just mark through prepositional phrases and you'll see how I arrived at that conclusion. The landscape flew by quickly as, you can almost hear this crying for a subordinating conjunction, as we headed into deep water. That's a run-on. It's occurring at the place where we're adding the subordinate conjunction as. You do not need a comma in front of it because you have an independent clause followed by a dependent clause that does not require a comma. Suddenly our guide yelled at us to hold on tightly. A difficult rapid was approaching. You read that aloud, you should hear the break after tightly. I would use the word subordinating conjunction because there. It's just like the sentence in front of it. Independent clause followed by a dependent clause to correct the run-on. I grasped Maria's hand and then grabbed the side of the raft. Now, this doesn't say and then I grabbed the side of the raft. It's I grasped Maria's hand and then grabbed the side of the raft. Either way, it's correct. The front of the raft leaped into the water like a gymnast on the trampoline. We splashed hard into the river. Both of those ideas are really important. You've got a run-on creating confusion for the reader. I would suggest you just put a period there and a capital we. Capital W on the word we. I was soaking wet. It was so exciting. Great place for a semicolon. Everyone was safe, comma, it should be there, and no one had tumbled out of the raft. That is a run-on, and there should be a comma before the and. Fortunately, the next set of rapids, should be of rapids, was easier to navigate. Our heartbeats returned to normal. Great place for a comma and to correct the run-on. After 45 minutes of easy rapids, our guide warned us to stay alert. Only one verb there, warned. One subject, guide. That is a correct sentence. The end of our journey was approaching, comma, but first we had to go over a small waterfall. Otherwise, if we didn't make this correction, we would have a run-on. We had to paddle furiously. Our raft might capsize in the river. Let's check that semicolon. Is this semicolon equal to a period? Yes, because you could have written, we all had to paddle furiously, period. Our raft might capsize in the river. Sometimes in stories like this, this one, a writer will use a semicolon in order to create some tension and to keep the story moving along. This is correct. Suddenly we were free falling in foam as our raft dove into the waterfall. You have were free falling as the verb, we as the subject, as is the subordinating conjunction, raft as the subject, dove as the verb. You have an independent clause followed by a dependent clause you have a correct sentence. And now you're probably going to ask me, what happened after you were free falling in foam and your raft dove into the waterfall? Well, I guess you'll never know, because that's the end of the exercise. You can choose your own ending. And now we're going to move on to comma splices.